Okay, so let's unpack this. You ever catch yourself thinking, ugh, I'm just so lazy?
Oh, definitely. All the time.
Especially when there's that one thing you know you should be doing, but ugh, you just can't bring yourself to start.
Hmm.
What if that feeling, that laziness thing, isn't actually the real story? What if procrastination is more like your brain trying to navigate some tricky emotions?
Right, like a survival response almost.
Yeah, and pushing harder just kind of backfires. That's the really fascinating idea we're diving into today.
And it is fascinating because it reframes the whole thing, doesn't it? We've often treated it as, I don't know, a character flaw or maybe just bad scheduling.
Exactly, time management issue.
Yeah, but the insights we've been looking at, they point to something much more, well, nuanced. A psychological strategy, maybe, even if it doesn't always serve us well.
Mm-hmm.
So our goal in this deep dive is really to get under the hood of why it happens and, crucially, to give you some, psychology-backed tools to sort of take back the driver's seat.
Not just quick fixes.
No, we're exploring the deeper motivations here.
Yeah, because we've all been there, haven't we? That looming task, maybe a big work project or even something you want to do,
Huh.
and suddenly reorganizing your bookshelf seems incredibly appealing.
Totally. Or cleaning the kitchen floor.
Right. It feels like a time issue.
Yeah.
But our sources suggest the real drama is happening like with our emotions.
That's right. Dr. Tim Peichel's work is really insightful here. He suggests procrastination isn't really about poor time management at all.
Okay.
It's fundamentally about managing our mood, in the short term.
Short-term mood repair, is that the idea?
Exactly. When we face a task that triggers feelings of, say, stress or boredom or maybe anxiety,
Hmm.
our brain looks for a quick escape hatch. And that enjoyable distraction, scrolling through your phone, grabbing a snack, it provides that immediate hit of relief.
Ah, okay. So it's not that we consciously choose to, like, slack off out of pure idleness.
Probably not, no.
It's more like we're trying to dodge a negative feeling. Like, think about that college student in Boston, maybe, staring down a 10-page essay.
Yeah, that's overwhelming.
Totally. The anxiety kicks in. And suddenly spending an hour on Instagram feels, well, a lot more pleasant.
Way more pleasant.
It's not laziness. It's like an attempt to feel better right now.
And understanding that shift, from procrastination as laziness to procrastination as emotional regulation, that's incredibly powerful.
Right.
Because if it's about emotions, then just trying to, grit your teeth and power through with willpower alone,
Doesn't usually work.
it's often going to be a losing battle. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're trying to logic your way out of a feeling, which, let's be honest, rarely works. The key is to actually address that underlying discomfort. So for that Boston student,
Yeah.
breaking that huge essay down into smaller, less intimidating chunks, that can make a huge difference.
Okay, makes sense.
Each small win kind of reduces that feeling of being overwhelmed, makes it easier to keep going. And maybe celebrating those initial steps, that gives positive reinforcement, shifting the whole emotional landscape.
Okay, so if we're primarily trying to manage feelings when we procrastinate, what's like a tangible way we can start to disrupt that cycle? Something practical.
Well, one surprisingly effective psychological technique the sources highlight is the 10-minute rule.
The 10-minute rule. Sounds simple.
It does. Maybe too simple, you might think. But it really taps into how our brains are wired. Often, the biggest hurdle isn't the task itself. It's just the act of starting it. Our minds can build up this huge resistance to beginning something that feels difficult or unpleasant.
So it's like that moment of inertia, just getting the ball rolling is the hardest part.
Exactly that. Think about maybe a software engineer in Seattle who kept putting off cleaning out their totally overflowing inbox.
Oh, I can relate to that.
Right. The sheer volume of emails probably felt crushing. But by making a commitment just 10 minutes, they lowered that initial barrier.
Okay.
And what often happens, and what happened for them apparently, is that once you start, that resistance just kind of melts away. You get into a bit of a flow. Maybe the task isn't as bad as you built it up to be. The inertia shifts, from avoiding the task to actually carrying it forward.
But honestly, just 10 minutes, if you've got a huge task, does that really make a dent?
That's a fair question. And the beauty of it, I think, is that it bypasses that overwhelming feeling. 10 minutes feels manageable, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
No matter how daunting the whole project seems, and often, like you said, those 10 minutes turn into 20, maybe 30.
And suddenly you've made some progress.
Exactly. Before you know it, you've actually gotten somewhere. It's about sort of tricking your brain into getting started.
Okay, tricking the brain. I like that. Now, what about those procrastination habits that feel really, like, deeply ingrained, almost part of who we are?
That's a great point. And this connects beautifully with the concept of identity-based habits. James Clear talks about this a lot in Atomic Habits.
Ah, yeah, good book.
Right. The core idea is that our actions often just reflect who we believe ourselves to be.
Okay.
So if your internal narrative is, ugh, I have to do this report, it feels like a chore, an obligation, something you naturally resist.
Hmm.
But if you can shift that to something like, I am the kind of person who completes their reports efficiently, well, that creates a much stronger internal drive.
So it's not just about doing the thing.
No, it's about being the person who does the thing. It's quite powerful, actually.
I see what you mean. Yeah, that's subtle, but it feels profound.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just ticking off a to-do list,
Mm-hmm.
you're focusing on the kind of person you want to become. Our source mentioned a young entrepreneur in Austin.
Right.
Instead of just saying, okay, I need to send out 10 emails today, they reframed it. Something like, I am a proactive and communicative leader.
Exactly. And that shift in identity then informs their actions in a much more like fundamental and sustainable way. It's not just forcing it.
Right. It comes from within then.
Precisely. It's about cultivating the identity of someone who doesn't put off the things that matter to them. Now, we all know those tempting distractions are always lurking.
Oh, yeah. The phone, the internet.
How can we minimize their pull?
That's where intentionally shaping our environment comes in, right?
Definitely.
Our surroundings have this massive impact on our behavior, often without us even realizing it. If you're trying to focus, but your phone's buzzing constantly,
You're fighting a losing battle.
yeah, it's a constant battle for your attention. So how do we make it easier to focus on what matters and like harder to get sidetracked?
By actively engineering your environment. Make procrastination harder and the desired behavior easier.
Okay. Well,
Think about using app blockers on your phone or computer. Freedom, cold turkey, those kinds of things. Temporarily shut down those tempting websites and social media.
I've heard of those.
Another really interesting tactic the sources mention is turning your phone screen to grayscale.
Grayscale. Why?
Well, it reduces those dopamine triggers, those bright colors, the notifications. They feel rewarding to our brain. Take away that visual appeal, and you might lessen the urge to constantly check your phone. It becomes less interesting.
Clever.
And the sources also highlight your physical workspace. Working in a quiet public library, maybe, or a co-working space,
Yeah.
it can create a sense of accountability,
Yeah.
and minimizes distractions compared to being at home where the TV, the fridge, they're right there.
That makes perfect sense. Like that
Right.
remote worker in Denver they mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Finds it easier to focus by working in a visible, quiet cafe. That subtle social pressure, even if no one's actually watching.
It can be surprisingly strong.
Yeah, a strong motivator to stay on task. So we're talking about actively creating barriers to those distractions. Okay. Now we've covered managing emotions, shifting identity, tweaking the environment. But what happens when that initial spark, that motivation, just isn't there? Because let's be real, that happens a lot.
It really does. And that's where this idea of building reliable systems becomes so crucial. You can't just rely on fleeting motivation.
Right.
Motivation is like, well, like the weather, isn't it? It's unpredictable. Systems, on the other hand, they're like the infrastructure that supports your goals no matter how you're feeling on any particular day.
Like actually scheduling specific blocks of time in your calendar
Yeah.
for certain tasks and treating those appointments with yourself as like non-negotiable.
Exactly that. And the if-then planning strategy is another really effective tool for building these systems.
If then, how does that work?
It's about creating specific triggers and predetermined actions. So the source shared an example of a creator in New York using Google Calendar. Their rule was, if it's 9 a.m., then I start editing my podcast. By making that decision in advance, you eliminate all that mental energy you spend deciding what to do right now. Takes the guesswork out.
It's like creating a little autopilot for your productivity.
Pretty much.
You don't have to wait for inspiration to strike. You just follow the system you've already designed.
Okay.
Now, what if you have the best intentions? You've set up your systems, maybe tried the 10-minute rule, and you still find yourself slipping up and procrastinating, which happens.
It absolutely happens. And this is where the often underestimated power of self-compassion comes in.
Self-compassion. Interesting.
Yeah, research actually indicates that people who can forgive themselves when they procrastinate, they're less likely to do it again in the future.
Really? So beating yourself up about putting things off actually makes the problem worse.
It seems so.
That feels counterintuitive, but
Yeah.
yeah, it kind of resonates.
It does, doesn't it? Harshly criticizing yourself can create this negative association with the task itself, making you want to avoid it even more next time, creates a pain link.
Okay.
Think about that working mom in Chicago example. She started journaling when she missed deadlines.
Right.
Instead of just, berating herself, she used it as a chance to understand why she delayed the task,
Hmm.
and then brainstorm different approaches for next time.
So more constructive.
Exactly. That act of self-reflection and understanding, it fosters resilience, a
Hmm.
growth mindset,
Hmm.
rather than just shame and more avoidance.
So learning from the moments of procrastination, not just punishing ourselves for them. Okay. Wow. We've covered a lot of ground here. How does all of this kind of come together when we're trying to break free from that procrastination trap?
Well, ultimately, procrastination often functions like a habit loop, right? There's a cue.
Like feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, maybe feeling overwhelmed by a task that
Mm.
triggers a craving
For relief.
for relief, yeah, which leads to the response doing something else, procrastinating, and then the reward, that temporary escape from the discomfort.
The habit loop. Cue, craving, response, reward.
Exactly. So to truly overcome procrastination, we need to become aware of that loop in ourselves and then intentionally work on rewiring it.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? The rewiring.
The sources offer some practical steps for each stage. For the cue, try to
Yeah.
make the cues for your desired behavior more obvious, like set out your work materials the night before.
Make it easy to start the good thing.
Right, for the craving. Try to make the task itself more appealing. Can you listen to music? Can you work with a friend? Can you promise yourself a coffee afterward?
Gotcha. Make it less unpleasant.
For the response, remember the power of starting small. That 10-minute rule again. Just begin.
Lower the bar for action.
And for the reward, crucially, be sure to acknowledge and celebrate even your smallest wins. Really reinforce that positive association with getting started.
Small steps, consistent effort, celebrating the wins, no matter how minor. It really sounds like the key message here is that overcoming procrastination isn't about some huge, dramatic overnight transformation.
Not at all.
It's more about making these small, sustainable shifts in our underlying emotional responses and those habitual patterns.
Exactly. And it's so important to remember, as our sources really emphasize, consistency is far more valuable than striving for perfection.
Right. Don't aim for zero procrastination.
No. You don't need to completely eliminate it. The goal is just to get a little bit better at managing it one small, intentional step at a time.
Okay. So to kind of bring it all together then,
Mhm.
it seems really clear that what we often just label as laziness is actually a much more complex response. It's rooted in how we manage our emotions.
Absolutely.
And we've explored some really actionable psychology-based strategies to start taking control. That simple but powerful 10-minute rule. The transformative idea of identity-based habits. Intentionally designing our environment. Building reliable systems instead of just waiting for motivation.
The self-compassion piece.
Yeah, the crucial role of self-compassion and understanding how to rewire that underlying habit loop.
And this brings us to a really important point for you, the listener, to consider. Think about one task you've been putting off.
Okay.
What's the feeling that comes up when you just think about starting it? Is it dread, anxiety, boredom?
Identify the feeling.
Yeah. And then what's one tiny step you could commit to? Maybe it really is just 10 minutes. Something that might help shift that feeling and begin to build a new, more positive association with getting started.
So find the cue, understand the craving or feeling, and introduce a tiny positive response and reward.
Exactly. It's those small, conscious actions done consistently that can create really significant change over time.
Absolutely. Lasting change isn't about grand gestures, is it? It's about those consistent small steps. By understanding the science behind why we procrastinate and trying out some of these practical strategies, you absolutely have the power to break free from that cycle and hopefully move towards your goals with, well, a bit more confidence and maybe a lot less stress. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.